Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast Livestream Q&A Pet Extravaganza. We are going to answer your super chat questions.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Here we go. As has become our tradition, we will start by answering some of the questions that came in episode 56 before moving on to the ones that came in today. Just watched your debate with Dawkins. Where would you draw the line at what can and cannot reasonably be considered an extended phenotype, and why?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Yes, I know.
Where would you draw the line as to what can or cannot be?
There's no hard and fast line.
Yeah, I think the thing is, the real question is, what does selection see and what does selection not see? So this idea of extended phenotype is Dawkins' concept that, well, if you take the shallow end, you've got genes that move through time by organizing molecules into bodies that do things that advance the gene's interest, right? Nobody finds that controversial. Dawkins' point is that bodies organize the world outside them in an analogous way that advance the gene's interest. And so in extreme cases, a beaver will cut down trees that will block a waterway that will create a habitat that causes the beaver to be able to, leave generations of descendants.
And this is one of the examples, but maybe the most salient example that he uses in his book of the same name, The Extended Phenotype. And he has, I don't know if he still feels this way, but for decades, I believe he felt that extended phenotype was his biggest and most important contribution to science.
I think he still does.
Yeah. This is a book from 1981, maybe 82, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. In any case, the point then is, where does the analysis become absurd? As a footprint, an extended phenotype, right? Presumably not, because it's not meaningfully so. Could a footprint be an extended phenotype? It of course could be in a certain context. So the question isn't, where do you stop extending the analysis? The question is, where is the noise so great relative to the signal that selection can't see it and therefore can't operate to refine it? That's the question that we're after. So anyway, there's no obvious place to draw that line, but it's not about where we want to put the definition. It's about where selection has access to something.
So this one is a link with a question: why is this allowed to continue? It's a very revealing and long read. James Lindsay posted on Twitter, what are your thoughts? It's lockdownskeptics.org. And I think this is it, yeah. Written by Sebastian Friebel, a former parliamentary advisor to the German Bundestag, on 17th of November 2020. And he raises a number of concerns in this. I have only skimmed it. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it at all. So we are not in any way suggesting. Yeah, so we are in no way suggesting that we are not attesting to the veracity here or saying what we feel overall. But there are some things in here. There's one quote. Here we go. Recently, Bundestag President Schäuble even spoke about this himself with astonishing openness when he said, quote, the corona crisis is a great opportunity. In the crisis, resistance to change is diminished. We can now bring about the economic and financial union that we have so far failed to achieve by political means.
Yikes.
Yikes. Exactly. And so, could someone with completely good and pure intentions have said that? Yes. In the context of other changes that are afoot, is that most generous interpretation the best one that the most likely to be accurate one going forward? I don't think so. So I can't really say much more about this, but should we be concerned about how states and even larger governments might take advantage of the resistance to change that will happen to people after months and months and months of not being able to do what they are accustomed to being able to do? Yes, we should.
Yeah, I would say the questions are separable. What is the reasonable thing to do with respect to COVID, and to what use might people put this crisis in which we have a right not to be modified in this way? Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some opportunity in the fact that we have discovered that lots of things that we thought, that going to work is not what we once thought it was, and that might allow us to change things at this point now that we've discovered that. So there is a benign version of this, but I do have the sense that the massive transfer of wealth that is taking place between, for example, big businesses which are in a position to withstand COVID and small businesses which are not, is something that is going to be leveraged. And to the extent that it is going to be leveraged, it's also going to create skepticism of very reasonable measures that we can and should take to prevent the spread of disease. So anyway, it's a very frightening landscape in which it's very hard to have a conversation about the biology separate from the political context, and I feel like very few are getting it right.
No, and I guess just one more thing on this. The virus itself is a selective force on humanity. And the different responses to the virus in various places is a selective force on the populations on which those are being imposed. And some of them are presumably necessary due to the virus, and some of them are ill-advised, and some of them are well-intentioned but badly implemented, but selective forces all. And one of the ways that we saw, and I am not at the moment going to say whether or not I think it was conscious and imagined well in advance or simply opportunistic, but the fact that the protests after the death of George Floyd that became enduring and became riots in many places happened with the severity that they did is in no small part, I am certain, to lockdown fatigue. And so there was a selective force that was being responded to that allowed Black Lives Matter and other organizations to get people to spill into the streets in far greater numbers than would have been possible, I think, absent not the virus, but the responses to the virus, again, some of which were absolutely necessary and some of which weren't. And I'm not here going to go into all the distinctions between those.
Yep.
Okay, next question is a lot of things. It came in at the end last time at a high dollar amount, so I'm going to read it with the caveat that there's a lot of things here. Dr. Mike Yeadon, ? And can you explain the effect of U.S. money gambled in offshore books on the 2020 election and why markets haven't settled on the outcome? And how close is Eric to solving the speed of light problem? Please convince Joe Rogan and Jon Stewart to run for 2024.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I think if we respond to one of these.
Yeah. Dr. Mike Yeadon is a perplexing phenomenon. I am concerned about not only the implications of what he has to say, which are, I feel it is likely he is incorrect, but it is difficult to spot why, and that has me more interested in the analysis than I would otherwise be.
Some people don't know what you're talking about.
I'm trying not to get us kicked off of YouTube.
Yep, fair enough. Okay.
And so, in any case, it is somehow we have to figure out how those small number of voices that you can trust, and I hope that we are among them, can discuss the things that need to be discussed openly without being shouted down by all sides that are trying to sell some sort of politicized version of the truth. And we are headed for a catastrophe surrounding the analysis of where we are with respect to COVID, what is reasonable to do, what is not reasonable to do, what the cost-benefit analysis of reasonable measures are. And I should say this is going to get worse with the vaccine. The questions surrounding the vaccine, if you think they are simple, you are not understanding the landscape of this vaccine and the world that it is being introduced into. And so anyway, I don't know how we talk about that in a world where the sword of Damocles hangs over every channel and there is no court in which to appeal and establish that you are in fact behaving reasonably. But we have to figure out a way, because I do think a proper analysis is something that you are entitled to, that it will actually materially potentially alter the way you intersect these questions, and that, spooking everybody so we can't talk about it so that you have only the official version to go on is unfair to you and everybody else. So
that's right.
Anyway, yeah.
So, and we have several vaccine questions coming up, so we'll get back to that.
Okay.
You are cordially invited, once COVID is at approximately handled level of control, to a Dungeons & Dragons game in Minneapolis with a bunch of 30 to 40-year-olds. Not PC and with good beer. Actually, I'm not sure if EN stands for in, but anyway,
Cordially
thank you for the
invited.
invitation.
Yes, I am told that Dungeons & Dragons is where it's at. So I hadn't heard Minneapolis invoked.
Oh, this is a particular invite.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
But
you played a little D&D as a kid, right?
A little bit.
It's a tiny bit.
A little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I meant to ask Zach this. Can you enable closed captioning? Don't know if it's in your control. It's not perfect, but can help. This helps me learn. Love what you bring. I think it's usually on, and it got it got turned off, not by our amazing producer, our 60-year-old son, Zach, but by the powers that be at YouTube. Is that right, Zach?
It's officially on. I don't know what YouTube is doing, but it's enabled from our perspective.
Okay, so this was a question from last time, and I saw a couple of people said that a few videos didn't have closed captioning. We always do turn it on. Are interested to hear if it's somehow not working, but ultimately we don't have control somehow, even though we should. Okay, first question from last hour. Regarding still life exercises, the purpose. So we talked about what still life paintings might be about in episode 56, I believe. Regarding still life exercises, the purpose is highly analogous to that of tinkering. Take complex forms, for instance, fruit, environments, bodies, etc., and simplify them down to more basic heuristic tools that can be easily replicated from memory. In this way, artists learn to internalize their subjects within a visual library comprised of a limited set of principles. Think of it like an artist's alphabet made up of lines, shapes, colors, compositions, etc. This is so beautiful, and I took a fair amount of art. I did a fair amount of even 2D art when I was younger, and that was never said to me, and I never intuited it, and it would have brought a whole new meaning and, frankly, intrigue and excitement to those. I mean, I feel the same way about. I played classical piano for many, many years, and fully a quarter of my practice day every day, fully a half an hour out of every 2 hours of practice, was scales and arpeggios and various just getting what there's not really muscle memory, but getting the muscle memory in your hands, and you can still make it beautiful and recognize that you're building the library. But for me as a musician, it was never explained to me at all, and I never heard that for 2D art either. And I just find this description amazing.
Yeah, I find it amazing too, but it challenges the very model that I presented. So I'm wondering whether it is in fact accurate.
Remind us what the model that you presented was.
Basically that painting a bowl of fruit got you, it was basically a skill generating exercise. Now, this model is consistent to that point, but my point was there was actually a bowl of fruit and that the person was painting it before it rotted.
Yeah, that's not inconsistent with this.
No, it is, because what this person is saying is that they are doing it from memory, and that knowing what a banana looks like and an orange looks like.
I don't read that this way at all. Simplifying them down to more basic heuristic tools that can be easily replicated from memory. So you're building a visual library comprised of a limited set of principles.
Well, I'd be curious. I do read it as from memory, but I agree with you. The way it's written, it could mean building that skill from an actual...
And certainly anecdotally, the 2D art that I took always had the object that you were expected.
That would be my expectation. Anyway, I'd be curious.
All right. We have a few vaccine questions here. I'm just going to I'm going to read all three of them, and then I'll go back through individually just so we know what's coming.
Sure.
mRNA vaccines, that is messenger RNA vaccines, are unknown agents with very high potential for long-term effects, specifically focused on reproduction at cellular and species levels. Plus, Big Pharma is using it says murine. I think it means murine, which is mice brain cells, to culture mRNA vaccines. Will you take? Next question is, please steelman the position of refusing the first iterations of the vaccine from a concerned medical professional who works in a city hospital system whose concerns are heavily echoed. Thank you. And the third vaccine question that we got this hour was, it is disturbing that with COVID vaccines, we have no clarity on duration of immunity, post-vaccination transmissibility, or if any of the vaccines will protect against mutated strains of COVID-19. So,
yeah. I'm not sure what to do with this, because this is a discussion I very much want to have. But again, the sword of Damocles.
Yeah.
Right.
And we did have this discussion a bit. I don't remember if it was episode 56 or episode 55. We did talk about vaccines and specifically.
Yep. But the problem is the question of will you take it and should one take it is far more complex than I believe we are allowed to discuss. And I think this is just purely analytical, that there's no politics that need to be here or should be here, but that the following thing is almost certain to unfold. There is a conflict between your individual interests and public health. Okay. The game theory does not support the public health conclusion. And those who are focused on the public health conclusion then end up misleading the public about the truth regarding safety, etc., in order that the behavior of people comes closer to matching the public health evaluation. Now, in a world
which looks like we're lying to you.
Well,
it can.
Looks like they're lying to us, is what I realize.
Yes, the people making the prescriptions about what everyone should be doing are often end up in a position of lying whether or not they know it.
Yes, they're lying, and frankly, I think many of them are lying for what they feel is a good cause, but that they are not even justified in that escape, because in effect what we have is a system of perverse incentives in which they are doing the bidding of an unholy phenomenon in the market. So anyway, I don't want to get caught. I'm not going to lie like they do. I also do recognize, though, that discussing the conflict between the individual health and the public health perspective will result in people biasing towards the individual health perspective, which does have costs. It will kill people. And so, how the hell can we get to a place where we can properly have this conversation so that we can hold all parties to account for their portion of this disaster and figure out what the proper collective response is to it governmentally? That's what we are supposed to be doing. And the idea that we want to shut down certain people who want to point out, hey, actually, that thing you're talking about is a lie, and you haven't protected people, so you're steering them into that lie is actually steering them into danger that doesn't have to be there. Right. So anyway, I don't know how we do this.
I don't either. I will say anecdotally that I actually had conversations with two different doctors, medical doctors this week about this, who I was seeing for other reasons. And I just asked them, what's it looking like for you in your particular institution? They're in two very different institutions. One of them a very big university hospital situation, one of them a small practice. What's the situation for you? When do you think you're going to see it? And are you excited about being able to take it as soon as you can? And I got wildly different responses from these two doctors, both of whom I see, and I only see doctors who I respect. But one of them is just gung ho, excited, thinks it might happen this month, and ready to move on and ready to get everyone vaccinated absolutely as soon as possible. And she, in this case, is eager to sign up, and the other one is not at all convinced that, for one thing, that all the healthcare professionals should be the first wave of guinea pigs for largely untested vaccines. And this doctor also pointed out that apparently the elderly populations have not been in any of the clinical trials so far, so we actually have almost no information. We basically have no information on how older people will be affected by these vaccines. But of course, the people who are at greatest risk of dying from this disease should be first in line, or at the top of the list, if it's safe. But we don't know.
Well, I hate to say it,
Hmm.
we do know it's not safe. We do not know that it does harm. And the distinction has to do with what the amount that we do not know about the vaccine yet and cannot know.
Yeah.
Right? Everything having been done right and the signs being positive doesn't tell you that there isn't a long-term consequence here that we don't yet know about. So anyway, let's leave it at that and figure some way to have this conversation where we are not placing our entire livelihood in jeopardy over it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think is there anything else? Okay, we'll leave the vaccine questions there. This is just a comment. We'll be watching while enjoying a cup of joe from my new DarkHorse Podcast coffee mug. I'm happy to support your channel, and as always, I'm looking forward to an entertaining and informative show. Thank you.
Excellent.
This one. Well, this is news to me. And I don't know if it's true. What is the evolutionary effect of the current state of global male population of sunning one's balls? Hint, it increases testosterone and hair growth on one's noggin.
Wait, what?
It's news to me.
Look, I know some people are involved in some weird stuff, and I
never had balls. I imagine it might feel good.
I think
you don't want to get burned.
It would feel vulnerable, and yes, that burning thing would be a real concern.
Yeah.
First of all, I think if you're sunning your balls, you probably have too much time on your hands. Maybe we all do at this point. But
I don't know. I mean, maybe you have time and privacy. I hope you have privacy if you're sunning your balls.
But I don't understand really what's being asked here. The evolutionary effect on...
So, I mean, the person has said what he, have to presume,
testosterone,
believes or has read it does. So we don't know. That seems unlikely. On the other, increasing testosterone, like what's there? It's sperm, which aren't then, you're not then getting a germline, soma line transfer of information between the sperm that are currently in your testicles and somatic tissue that may or may not be increasing production of testosterone, right? I mean, right?
I just don't. I don't even know. Global male population. What is the global male population? How is that different than global population?
Well, the other half of the population doesn't have balls to sun.
Right, but the current state of global male population. I don't understand the question.
Okay. And we don't imagine that this would be true.
I mean, are they asking about will there be more people? And if so, why is male next to population? If they are asking what is the effect of an increase in the fraction of the global male population that is sunning its balls, I would say the fraction is very small, even if we multiply by 2 by virtue of the number of balls people tend to have.
Yeah, and just one at a time, maybe, to reduce the risk of burning.
I don't know.
I would say it's also probably lower now than it would be during the northern summer because there are fewer people in the southern hemisphere, and anyone trying to sun one's balls in the northern hemisphere at the moment is likely to freeze them off instead.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a real risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine. Sure. Okay. Next question. For those doing a science undergraduate degree, what non-science subjects would you recommend as electives? I love this question. I mean, most schools are going to constrain you, right? And what you take depends, whether or not you can learn from what you're taking depends so much more at this point on who's teaching it than on what it's called. Because in practically every field, there are yahoos as PhD experts. But any form of art, including music and theater and such, would be high on my list. Philosophy that's well done, but so much of it is badly done. I started out as a literature major and basically took the reading lists and ran away at the point that it became too postmodern, which was a mere 2 years later. But good critical reading of literature is extraordinary as well. And economics is super valuable. I know I'm missing a lot here. I actually have a degree in anthropology, which when done well is brilliant.
Yeah, but the problem with econ and anthro and all these things and literature, the problem is everything's done badly. I would say do something where you pick up a technique that you can take with you, right? Something where you're learning to build, to construct something, and it's something that you can not drop at the end of the term, but that you can continue doing, so that basically you use the environment of school to give you the on-ramp to something you would have difficulty accessing on your own, but that then continues to pay back for life.
One thing I took in college that I loved and haven't really had access to was book arts, printmaking. Made broadsides for a couple of quarters, and it's just actually laying movable type, and the sort of very meditative, and you recognize how your brain is flipped around as you're trying to lay this thing in the trays, lay type in the trays so that it will read correctly on print. But that was one of these classes that I never really thought a lot about in advance. I sort of happened into it because where I was at that point had a really great printmaking studio, and it allowed sort of privacy and meditation and art, and I could create my own prose and poetry that I then laid into type and could really reflect deeply on whether or not my words were good enough to warrant the investment of time of actually laying the type, or if actually this was just the ramblings of an 18-year-old and didn't warrant it. So that sort of activity too can be surprisingly rewarding, even though it's obviously the work of a Luddite at some level. No one needs to work with movable type anymore, but it's beautiful. I have a particular fondness for letterpress and the way that it feels. The heavy paper and the impressions it leaves are unique. You don't get it with standard printing.
I'm thinking drawing, for those of us who don't draw, that's a skill that shows up in all kinds of places, and if you can get somebody to get you off the foothill, it would be super useful. I wish I had it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, I've got a Bachelor's of Science. I'm not sure exactly what this question means, but we will interpret it as we can. I've got a Bachelor's in Science in Natural History Illustration, and I'm trying to get into a bioveterinary science Bachelor's of Science at 23. Is this wise? Wanting white nose syndrome. How do I otherwise best study wildlife diseases? So I think there's just like a missing word or a misspelled word here, but I think this is a reference to white nose syndrome, which is a fungal infection that many North American bats now have, and it's more than decimating many bat populations.
Yeah.
I
don't understand what white nose syndrome is doing in that question.
Right. I don't either. I think what is meant is this person is interested in studying white nose syndrome, although I may have that exactly wrong. How do I otherwise best study wildlife diseases? Wildlife biology, wildlife science, it goes by different names in different schools, but is different from bioveterinary science. And man, we need veterinarians, but that field has become as pharmaceutically driven as medicine, and even harder to make a living at, I think, because people don't tend to have insurance for their pets. So it doesn't look like a career move that is nearly so rewarding as it used to be, unfortunately. Do you have anything more here?
Nope. I'm still puzzling over. I certainly think natural history illustration is important. I don't have anything to add, really.
Imagine we could add a critical thinking class into the high school curriculum. What tools or lessons would you like students to walk away with? Thank you for your very insightful responses to my questions.
I would say there. I hesitate to say there is only one skill, but there is one focus, which is the ability to take on an argument so well that you can deliver it whether or not it matches what you actually believe to be true, and sort of steel manning, whether you're in a scientific context or a philosophical context or a political context, is the thing that trains your mind for analysis better than anything else, because you decamp and encamp, if that's the alternative, into these different perspectives, and because each of them has a large framework that goes with it, the ability to activate them at will is it makes you mentally nimble, I think.
So I never had access to, and almost certainly would not have chosen to do, what you did in high school before you came to the high school where we met in 11th grade. But you want to speak just briefly to, we didn't have critical thinking classes. I mean, we both went to, ultimately the same and earlier different high school that were, in my estimation, so good at so many things. But you specifically learned the skill that you were just talking about in an extracurricular form.
Yeah, I did speech and debate, and there was a way in which speech and debate was terrific training for thinking about just about anything. There was also a way in which it was, it's an amoral weapon. And I have the sense that a lot of people who did speech and debate, speech and debate are two different things. It's really debate that the problem arises with. And it's not all debate. There's different kinds of debate. So Oxford debate is the sort of ruthless teams of two who do battle with each other, as opposed to Lincoln Douglas debate, which is individuals and is gentler. And the problem is it's very useful to learn the skills of Oxford debate, but among the skills were an argument. You could make an argument that was persuasive while being wrong, even though you knew it was wrong, as long as the people you were making the argument against couldn't spot it or articulate what was wrong with it, right? Now, on the one hand, that's good mental training. On the other hand, in the context of a high school speech tournament, fine. In the context of people who will go on to inhabit other roles, there's only really one role where you want that to exist, I guess, which is the law. But even there, it's a frightening tool. And so anyway,
it's amoral at best, as you said.
Yeah. But anyway, it's good training for the mind, but I wish it came along with something. I don't even know what it would be, because the problem is that the activity incentivizes whatever works, right? And that's not a good, that's not a good model if you're trying to build a whole person who knows what they can get away with but shouldn't, right? So anyway, yes, there's part of the answer in speech and debate, but it's also a problem waiting to happen in the wrong hands. It's very dangerous, and most people's hands are the wrong hands, and high school does nothing about teaching you anything that would be useful in restraining that force.
We're at
35 minutes. Okay, we'll get two more here, and then we'll move to this hour. Those questions. Might there be an evolutionary benefit to remaining technologically primitive? Some recent reports indicate the Amish growing as a percentage of the U.S. population, albeit slowly.
Well,
I had not heard that. I'm curious if it's true.
We didn't end up doing it, but before we wrote our book, I had in mind a chapter which was going to start as an essay called "Are the Amish Right?" Right,
Yeah.
and this is long before there would have been any evidence that they are right by virtue of their population growing. But the basic question is, if you recognize what technology will do if you just keep pursuing it, then is there a point at which you stop arbitrarily and voluntarily? And what is the consequence of that? And there are two ways to be right, really. You can be right that you should step off the treadmill somewhere, because if you keep going, it'll kill you, right? Or you can be right about the particular place that you can take technology and then bail out, right?
Yeah.
And so they could be right about one and not the other.
But not the other and not the one.
Or they could be right about neither.
No, I mean, you can't know where to step off, but not know to step off.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So anyway, yes, I think there's a way in which they're clearly right. We are hurting ourselves so terribly, with new technologies that have complex consequences that make us unhealthy in all kinds of ways. And, it is unclear yet whether we will figure out a way to rein that in.
I mean, they're living the kind of response globally that we suggest for many particular instances that come with the words precautionary principle or Chesterton's fence, right? These are exactly the principles that I presume, without formalizing it in any sort of Amish tomes, are what this, and Luddite is another of these terms that describes, no, this looks like we're going to go over a waterfall, so we're going to pull out now.
Yeah, I think also one has to imagine that at the point this decision was made, it was contemporary, right? And so no more, at the point you have a phone and you've got a buggy, but you don't have a motor car, right? Saying, well, we're done with this. And then it becomes more and more anachronistic.
Yeah.
So it raises those questions. But I would also say that there's clearly a kind of wisdom associated with the choice, because the Rumspringa tradition, which I assume arose early, recognizes that it is not a slam dunk, right? And that basically if you forbid the young to engage the modern world will be irresistible. And if you build in the encounter with the modern world and you give time to live as a modern, and then you come back or you don't.
So Rumspringa being something like, you didn't define it, so I'll try, but I may have the details wrong. Something like every Amish child at the point that they are, I don't remember, 17, 18, 19, something, is allowed to take a year outside of the Amish community and go live among the moderns. And then at the end of the year, and I may have the details wrong, they either come back or they don't. But if they don't, after some prescribed amount of time, they don't retain the ability to come back 5, 10, 20 years later. The door closes, not after a week or a month, after a considerable amount of time, but it will close.
Yeah.
And I think, how incredible to be in such a constrained community and to trust your children with that.
Yeah. Now, if we have the details wrong, I would imagine that our show is actually pretty popular in many Amish communities, and I hope they'll contact us.
Maybe someone on Rumspringa will
send us a super chat postcard.
Wow. This next one is just a recommendation for a guest. Please consider inviting British evolutionary biochemist and writer Nick Lane from UCL for a discussion about aging. He has written at length about its evolution and the influence of the Hayflick limit, telomeres, and the role of mitochondria and oxygenic stress on aging.
All right.
All right, we will add that to. And here's just one more suggestion. Please consider inviting This Week in Virology host, I should know how to pronounce his name, I've listened to a few of them, but Vincent Razzaniello, to discuss COVID vaccines. Thank you kindly. All right. Super chat messages from this hour. Evolutionarily, why is skin color a blend of both parents, whereas eye color is not? Does eye color have to be snaky to avoid social judgment? Or is it because eye color impacts survival less than skin color? This is Echo asking the question. And it's terrific. So, she goes right to the ultimate level rather than sticking with the proximate level, like, well, eye color is, simple Mendelian genetics. And and I think the answer, I'd never asked the question before, I never considered it. But I think this, is it because eye color impacts survival less than skin color, is likely to be it, right? That two parents with skin that works in the environment in which they conceived you, a blend of those skin colors should work well in the environment into which you were born. Whereas eye color has, aside from totally pigmentless eyes, eye color has very little to say about survival, I would say, certainly in terms of sun exposure and burning.
Yeah, I think I would put it a little bit differently. And I
Mhm.
would say there is an advantage, and the advantage may not be to the individual. In fact, it probably isn't. But there's a lineage level advantage to having variation in skin color that can be modified based on exposure. Because basically we know that melanin in the skin is sunscreen, and that the need for it is something that varies with environmental conditions that change over space, either latitude or altitude, or clothing or various other things. And so basically, why do you have a many gene trait when it comes to skin color and a Mendelian trait when it comes to eye color? Maybe because there's value in selection, basically pushing skin towards darkness or lightness depending upon where your population finds itself. And the fodder to do that has to do with lots of genes rather than a small number in which you would have a discrete distinction
Mhm.
between populations.
Yeah, I think both of those things are likely to be true.
Yeah.
That having a blend of your parents' skin colors will be a good match for the environment in which they both exist and you were conceived and born, and being multigenic, presumably, facilitates the ability of skin to change with sun exposure.
Yeah.
Good. Will cloth masks now be germ preservers if they are stored in cold cars? Will surface transmission be more likely with germs kept alive through winter this way? So this question, I think, emerges from the observation that people are keeping masks in their cars, and never take them out, and in some places actually don't even take them out to wear them. They just live in the car, and then they will put them on if they absolutely have to, if they're required to. Which, we think that cold is going to preserve the virus, and doesn't this effectively create an additional problem in terms of effectively storing the virus for activation?
Well, a couple things. One, I think we have learned, and somebody took me to task for my use of the term fomite. And in fact, I looked it up to make sure that I didn't have it wrong, and I did have it slightly wrong. The fomite is the surface itself rather than the particle transmitted on the surface.
Oh, is that right?
Yep.
I didn't know that.
I hope I now have it right.
I'm going to look it up while you talk
but
about fomites.
in any case, here's the point. I think we know
an inanimate object or substance that is capable of transmitting infectious organisms from one individual to another.
There it is.
Yeah.
So I think that fomite transfer is not especially common with COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
And therefore, the fact that you will preserve the virus in your car potentially on a mask doesn't increase the tendency to be transmitted by a surface. And therefore, if the tendency wasn't very high, yes, this will increase the duration over which it could happen. But it might, a mask, if you have COVID, then your mask will have COVID, and it could last on there longer, but you're not going to infect you.
Mm-hmm.
So will somebody else be more likely to be infected because the period of time over which your mask is infectious goes up? Yes, arguably. Not very high, I wouldn't think. The other thing I want to know, though, and this goes sort of into the biology of SARS-CoV-2, but I believe that the nature of the viral capsule here is not that it is membrane based, and therefore I wonder whether freezing might, freezing below some level would damage it. Probably not, but it could. And B, The other thing about the cars is that you're going to get oscillations. You're going to warm your car up. It's going to be good and toasty as you're driving around. Then it's going to cool off. Then it's going to warm up. That kind of thing tends to be very hard on something like a microorganism.
Yeah, the car isn't just cold unless you're never, ever in it. If you
Right.
ever drive it, you heat it right up.
Right. The chances that that somebody could get infected getting in your car after it's sat in the driveway for 3 days is probably higher in the winter. But the warm, cool cycles are probably protective, if anything.
Yeah, that's good. I hadn't occurred to me. I think that's right. I so admire your equanimity and integrity, coupled with your incisive brilliance. To what do you each attribute this unusual confluence of virtues? Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I will say this. Many of the rare, useful characteristics in life are rare because the thing that would cause you to discover that they work is not common. The conditions in which it is revealed that this is a valuable thing. So to take one example, the experience of publicly advocating for an analytical perspective and then coming to understand that something about it was wrong and finding the strength of character to say that it was wrong publicly is all necessary before you discover what happens downstream of that, right? What you get is, oh, it's great to have a voice that does that actually goes back and fixes the thing that they said that was wrong. And so you actually, paradoxically, you don't like discovering that you were wrong and knowing that you have to say things publicly. But once you do it, you realize, oh, actually, it reinforces something that's even more important than being right about the particular point. Now, it would be easy to learn the wrong lesson there, and it would be easy to think, oh, being wrong is not that bad. Yeah, I'll just go correct it later. And the problem is if you're doing that too often, then people discount what you say because although they realize you have the integrity to correct it, it means that you're not doing a very good job of quality control on the front end. So anyway, the point is that whole landscape of what happens when you're wrong based on what you do about it then is hard to find the first few times. And then once you've found it, it's like, oh, you just get good at trying not to be wrong. And when you're wrong, doing the right thing about it. So anyway, I guess my point would be unusual developmental experiences that rewarded weird stuff. To the extent that this question has an answer, it's that.
You want to provide any specificity as to what the weird stuff was that was rewarded for you? You just said unusual developmental experiences that reward weird stuff. Or you just want to leave it at that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't parse it. Maybe given some thought, I could come up with stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I could come up with things for you, but maybe I won't do
if
that.
you do what you think is right.
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of things we've already talked about. Debate, for instance, and you had a grandfather who took up apparently risky experiences like skiing and climbing Mount Whitney with you, in the 60s, in his 60s rather.
Yeah, not the 60s.
Not the 60s. You weren't born until the very end. And yet he had a reputation for extreme caution and almost for lacking courage, and yet
safety net,
right? And he was both extremely careful and cautious and driven to explore and to take risk that seemed worthwhile. And you got to spend a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
And, that just even just those two things together, and there are, of course, many more. I think in your case, you were also extraordinarily informed by school and you having no fondness for one another whatsoever. I had a completely different trajectory with also some inputs from very rigorous scientifically engineering impacted people, and also at the same time some very artistic influences. And the combination of having spent time with literature and lots of different kinds of arts and and both of us got to travel some. For the most part, my travel was domestic as a child, but not entirely. And just being able to see different ways that people did things and interpreted what they did as young people was extraordinary. I think something that was super important was we met when we were 16, actually, in 11th grade. And became friends very quickly. And it quickly became clear to me that you had showed up in my awesome school because you'd been booted from your former school. You had been invited to leave, and you were brilliant. And I don't remember thinking this, but I imagine I thought, I thought boys who got booted from fancy schools were slackers who really weren't doing much. And that was obviously 100% clear from the beginning that that's not who you were. And I don't know if you thought about me, who was an ace student all the way down. Oh, I kind of thought ace students were boring generic rule followers who just liked the comfort of authority, which was never who I was either. So we got to be friends very quickly. We didn't get together romantically for several years, but could, without ever saying it to one another, I think, just recognize similarly interested in open questions minds who had wildly different developmental experiences in terms of being rewarded by a structure, in my case, and being almost completely punished by the same structures in your case.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, and you were a paradox because on the one hand, you were very good at the exact stuff I was not good at, right? The school stuff. On the other hand, you were very unconventional already. And I think, it took me years to understand exactly how that had happened, but it had a lot to do with you having, tomboy kind of instincts toward the world. Your dad having been a very unusual guy, in some ways he was a very traditional man's man. But, I think upon discovering that he had a daughter who, shared his sort of desire for adventure and his
math
approach to the
competitions.
world, was perfectly happy to mentor you in a way that he probably didn't expect he would be mentoring a daughter. And so anyway, when we met, it was an issue of like trying to resolve that paradox. I will say that the school I got kicked out of was an all-boys school, and I entered that all-boys school at exactly the wrong developmental moment.
In 7th grade.
In 7th grade, where I hadn't really gotten comfortable with the idea of girls, and then suddenly they didn't exist in my universe, and so I developed a kind of fear of them that was pretty profound. And then,
well, it didn't show when we met.
Well, it didn't show, but I mean, it didn't show specifically because you were unusual. So it was, so anyway, that broke through the fear that I had of girls because it somehow didn't apply to you. But anyway, I'm glad that all happened.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I've told my nurse sister-in-law about the lab leak hypothesis, and she looked at me like I was crazy. Why are healthcare professionals brainwashed?
Yeah, I think there's a good answer to this question.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a hopeful answer to this question, but there's a reason. And it has to do with the fact that so much in the area of medicine involves falseness that is generated, that needs to be there in order to do the work.
Yeah.
And therefore, you get used to the thing that makes those decisions so that the maximum amount of medical good happens, telling you what the conclusion is. And if you go into that scenario with the kind of mind that says, really? Do we know that? Do they have the data on that?
Right.
If you're doing that, you'll drive yourself insane. And so I think the environment kind of selects for somebody did the work, they came to the conclusion. It's my job to take that conclusion and go wield it well. And then at the point you get to something like, COVID, lab leak, vaccine safety, all of these things. And the point is you have, You have loons questioning all of it.
Mhm.
You have responsible people questioning all of it. Nobody can be terribly sure of a lot of the things that you would need to be absolutely sure of to do the analysis very well. So there's noise in everybody's analysis. That basically you've got a choice between, well, somebody's done that work and here's the conclusion. And it's, you know what, this laboratory, you think this came from, no, this came from nature. It came from bats, right? So that conclusion has been fed down the line with a bunch of sort of standard, overly simplified medical stuff. And well, like that, I think being in medicine requires a certain amount of not questioning everything.
Mm-hmm. On exercising differently indoors, I recommend checking out Katie Bowman's nutritious movement work based in Washington. Love to see a conversation between y'all. I'm not familiar.
Nope.
We'll put it on the list. Risky hypothesis. BLM and trans are allied through their reliance on postmodern thought. Trans, especially with actual transition, is a triumph of narrative over reality, a fundamental proof that postmodernism works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I do think that the trans people who we have known who are really truly trans do not pretend that sex isn't real and that they have actually transitioned into becoming the opposite sex. The triumph of narrative over reality that accompanies many modern transitions is this weird modern instantiation that is indeed postmodern, but is not inherently what being gender dysphoric is about, I would say.
Yeah, I would add, this seems to me in the same neighborhood as what I've been arguing about the online environment, that in fact, the postmodern rules are not far off of legitimate rules in an online discussion space. In other words, if I come into an online discussion space and I say I'm a woman, then A, there's no reason for which you cannot treat me as one. There is no justification for your failing to treat me as one, right? If I come into that space, then at some level, if I say I'm a woman, you should go with that. And the problem is, this logic only goes so far. It does not extend to a bathroom, to a prison, to sports that are segregated by sex. And so anyway, my sense is that the correct rules for how to deal with people online are simplified because the online environment is already bottlenecked to a very limited kind of interaction. And that it is when you attempt to take those rules and impose them on the outside world that you run into all of the paradox and you drive people crazy. Because if you're saying a man can become a woman because he says so, and I'm a biologist, do I hold my biologist tongue, or do I point out that you've just said something that doesn't make sense, right? I'm stuck. And so your feeling is, well, no, we've worked this out online, right? If somebody says they're a woman, they're a woman. Well, what part of you doesn't get that that's the right thing to do?
And the truth may be, the stakes were lower and it wasn't worth anyone's time. Also, because you'll throw a mob at them.
Well, I think the thing is, it's 100% social and not physical online.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, that simplified environment being one where the only important consideration, and mind you, we could figure out stuff for which it wouldn't be the only consideration, but in a discussion forum, the only real consideration, how do you even know who you're interacting with online? If somebody says they're female, how do I know you're really female? It's like, well, we're talking about geology. If I say I'm female, right?
Well, obviously it can be gamed, and we've talked about at the moment, in the past, if social media had existed 100 years ago, a woman might be pretending to be a man just to have voice.
Yep.
And right now, a man might be pretending to be a woman to get voice in certain subsects on social media, and so you can game the norms of the moment, and that doesn't help anyone but the individual gaming it. To what degree does it hurt the wider population, less so than in physical space, but still potentially harms it.
Yeah,
It harms the integrity of it.
I do think you can push things and find examples where it's not true. I'm just saying, in an informal space online, the postmodern is actually it's an environment with no physics.
Yeah.
And so because it's an environment with no physics, you can kind of set the rules, and to the extent that the rules might be common courtesy rules, then okay, problem solved.
Yeah.
And that's my sense, is that it is the false, it's like Burning Man, right? Burning Man, to some people, they think it proves that we can have some sort of utopian non-economic interaction with each other where people are good and artistic and generative and there's no conflict. And
Do people really think that?
They claim not to, and then you push them on it, and it turns out they do believe it, and they don't realize, you know what? Burning Man would be a whole different movie if the food stopped coming into the desert, because nothing's going to grow there, and so anyway, like that.
Yeah, or bring in everything you got and now live there for a year, as opposed to a week or whatever it is.
Right. Whatever it is that imposes conservation laws is going to cause a whole different scenario to unfold, which doesn't mean you couldn't build a civilization that would do many of the things that Burning Man does, but you can't just wish it into existence.
Yeah.
We're at an hour.
An hour. Okay, let's get through, 4 or 5 more, okay? Speculative question. What do you suspect the role of psychedelics played in our evolution and development? We've talked about psychedelics a few places.
Yeah.
Many cultures have some form of psychotropics, psychedelics, hallucinogens, entheogens. Pick your word.
Or a behavior that triggers these things.
Or behave sweat lodges and such, ecstatic dancing for days on end. So the pursuit of ecstasis and psychedelics is more than adjacent to that, is, I think, probably universal in cultures, and has, you looked like you had something to say.
I got things to say, but
okay,
you were headed somewhere.
Go for it.
All I was going to say is, riffing off of what you were getting at, it's so common in various cultures that we have to assume that this is something that human beings regularly discover, and that they engage when a culture has availed itself of the power to do this. Sometimes it's limited to one group within a culture, a shamanistic class, but basically it's a hack where you can access parts of the product of your subconscious mind. You can put your conscious mind in touch with it, and that's a very generative thing, that at some level it's like turning up the mutation rate on a genetic system. You're turning up the equivalent of the mutation rate or the porousness of a boundary within the consciousness system, and it results in, basically.
I like that. It enhances the porousness of the boundary of some consciousness system. It may increase individual consciousness, but also increase the ability for actual exchange across interpersonal boundaries.
Absolutely. And, there are lots of such hacks. Leaving a notebook by the side of your bed and writing down the content of your dreams is a hack, right?
Yeah.
You are wired. I have an interesting point about this at some point, but you are wired to forget the content of your dreams, right? Now, you're not wired to forget the content of every dream, but you're wired to forget the content of most of them. And so you can hack that system by taking the little period of time in which your memory of the dream evaporates and using it to write down enough of the dream that you can recover something meaningful from it. That's a hack. And psychedelics and other behaviors that cause those hallucinations do the same kind of trick, just gaining access to something that is ordinarily outside the scope of what you can contact.
Yeah. So with regard to what role they may have played long term, it's impossible to know. They leave no trace in the archaeological record, as far as I know. I don't know of any suggested trace in the archaeological record, but it is therefore mere untestable arm waving to propose something like psychedelics may have been part of what the expansion of the prefrontal lobe was about. We can't possibly know.
Well, they leave some record.
What kind?
For example, the Mazatec people and salvia. Salvia is a plant only known, if I got this right, only known from Mazatec gardens.
So salvia is a giant genus. You're talking about the particular
Salvia divinorum, the hallucinogenic one.
Okay.
Yes, the street name is salvia. If that tells you anything.
Diviner sage.
Yeah, diviner sage. Salvia divinorum is only known from this plant grown by the Mazatec, and that tells you that basically you have a speciation event, whatever its nearest relative is in the mints. This mint is now exclusively a cultivar. It's like a domestic goat. You know, there are goats in the world, but it only exists in the context of people. And so anyway,
but you're not recommending smoking goats.
Smoked goat can be good.
It's different.
Yes, it is different. But anyway, the point is that's leaving a record because what you've got is you don't have the fossil.
That's awesome. Yep.
But you have the product. You know, you have the descendants of the most recent common ancestor of.
And you could do an attempt at a molecular clock to assess the speciation event, the time since this split from its most recent or from its sister taxon, which I don't know what it is, and I don't know if the work's been done. And of course, it's different in plants and in animals to do that kind of work.
So
actually, it's I just pulled up Wikipedia. So who knows? But botanists have not determined whether Salvia divinorum is a cultigen or a hybrid, because native plants reproduce vegetatively and rarely produce viable seed. So either way, really, it's
either way, it's leaving the record of some kind of an event that we don't have a direct record of.
Yes. Okay. Back to Super Chat questions, where I appear to have. Oh my goodness! I think that was the question we just answered, and now it's blank. The hallucinogen question is now blank.
Spooky.
A little bit. I don't know what this is. This next one. Hey, Bret and Heather, do you have thoughts on AlphaFold 2?
What is that?
I have no idea.
No,
we don't.
I'm going to assume it's a movie, and my sense is it was poorly cast.
Hi guys, I'm from South America, and I notice an increasing trend in media to promote witchcraft, especially its relation with feminism here and in the U.S.
Oh yeah.
Why are we witnessing this return to paganism?
Because life is too easy, and so people who have foolish ways of looking at the world do better than we would expect them to. I don't know. I mean, we've seen it here too. We saw the New York Times in its front page section with a apparently serious article on a self-described witch. There is something. I think it's edgy.
It's edgy. I think it's imagined. I mean, I did have one student who was quite seriously a Wiccan, who I was close with, and I understood it to be a tradition that particular person and their mother, if I remember correctly, you really found community in and meaning. And this was a really good evolutionary biology student who, was not woo woo, but I don't love this language, but identified as Wiccan.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying that this is always the case, but I do have this sense that because witchcraft is female, and we are now in this mode of adulating all that is female and finding the traditional ways of being female that we have to love, that with that comes this really uninvestigated, oh well, women are doing it, let's celebrate it. It's like, okay, why are we talking? Why is everyone always talking about astrology now? And witchcraft? And astrology is not specifically female, and I'll just leave a little teaser here that actually astrology could be done right with, and I think we've actually talked about it here before, but I'm just not going to go there now. But it never is in the modern environment. But I feel like witchcraft is just like a thing that is so distinctly female that people are latching onto it as, see, we're celebrating women. Like, no, you're celebrating something that's kind of daft. What are you doing?
Yeah, I agree. And, as with the case of astrology, you could encode patterns that are real in a form that was non-literal and, build community around it.
Yeah, maybe we're to the degree that witches have existed in history. I just don't know anything about the history of witchcraft. But might some of them have been ethnobotanists, like the actual, curers of their neighborhoods who really understood the local plants and fungus that could actually help people? I bet they were. I bet this was some sort of female wisdom of health and environment that was then wrapped up in witchcraft. But modern instantiations of this that involve sitting around in people's East Side Manhattan apartments and claiming to be witches, not so much.
Yeah,
which is what that New York Times article was about, if I remember.
If I remember correctly.
Okay, two more. Bret, I am a Kiwi, where we have public health care and have also lived in the UK with National Health Service. The waiting times and bureaucracy also kill people. A bias towards public rather than individuals also kills people.
Mm-hmm. Oh, true. You get a trade-off, and what you want is a proper dispassionate net analysis, which we are never allowed to have because one side or the other is always punishing you for pointing out the awkward truths that go in the other direction. Yeah. But I've had it. You got to find a way to have these discussions because pretending that there is not a discussion to be had is very unpleasant at the very least, and dangerous.
Okay, two more because one is just a comment that was also from the first hour that I didn't get to. Can we just agree that these labels are problematic with regard to our discussion of the far right, far left stuff? Why not look at the only two that matter, adults versus children? The group identity game is childish.
No, I'm not convinced that in fact, I will say, I've forgotten the name of the second author on the high quality analysis.
Anna Zaitsev.
Anna Zaitsev. Anna Zaitsev cites in one of the places that I was looking into her work, the political compass, describing it as.
Is this so? This wasn't coming up before. This is her Medium piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scroll down.
Zach, if you just want to show this. Oh yeah, no.
I've lost it.
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Political Compass, Moral Foundations, Jonathan Haidt.
Yep.
So anyway, I think the point is, look, Political Compass ain't perfect, but it's a whole lot better than a one-dimensional analysis, right? Now, I've argued somewhere else, I can't remember where it was, but I just ran into it, that the Political Compass is still flatland, right? Mm-hmm. It's two-dimensional, but it's flatland, and that there's a z-dimension, and of course, the question is how many dimensions could you add and be more productive than you are destructive? But in any case, there are useful labels, and we have to remember that every time we create a label, it has a upside and a downside, and we want labels that pay their freight and then some, but we want never to forget that each time you draw one of these distinctions, you're going to have arbitrary stuff at the boundary. So anyway, yes, adult versus children is a useful one, very hard to operationalize.
Yeah.
Because it's not a matter of age anymore, really. But yes.
Okay, one more. And next week, we will start with this question about the Great Reset that came in very late here.
Okay.
Our final question for today is, hey guys, what's the word on DeepMind's protein folding breakthrough?
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is that what AlphaFold 2 was about?
Yeah, I'm thinking it was.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought so at the time, but I wasn't sure.
Okay. Different person. Terrifying. I find it terrifying.
I wouldn't say that. I first of all,
wait. You need you need to say what this is.
Okay, there's a long-running problem in biology, which is that genes encode proteins. Proteins are long strings of amino acids. Those strings of amino acids don't do anything. What happens is they collapse into machines that do things, and we're talking about literal machine-like entities,
They're nucleotide bases.
What are we talking about? No.
The genes aren't made of amino acids.
No, the genes aren't, but they encode these strings of amino acids, which collapse into machines, which do stuff. Okay. The problem is that there are an indefinitely large number of conformations that these strings of amino acids could collapse into. And if they collapsed into all of them, they wouldn't work. In fact, they would never work. But they don't collapse into all of them. They collapse into forms that do things. And in fact, these forms are sensitive to things like the temperature. So one of the reasons that a small fever can actually, a fever of 5 or 6 degrees Fahrenheit can be lethal is that your enzymes only have the proper conformation to do their job at that temperature. And so as you change the pH or change the temperature, the positive charge here that sticks to the negative charge there. If you put in too much energy, it breaks, and so the enzyme doesn't work. So in any case,
well, and also, that folding structure, the technical term being denatured, it just starts to come undone at temperature, and so the denaturing of a protein means that nothing on the surface of that protein looks the same as it does when it's in its normal range.
Right, but you could have two different creatures. You could have a creature whose normal temperature was 102 Fahrenheit, another creature for which it was 98, right? And the enzyme for the one at 98 won't work at 92 and vice versa. So denatured is one way to say it, but the point is outside of a narrow range for an endotherm, for a homeotherm, the range for viable temperatures for that enzyme will be relatively narrow. And anything outside of it or a change in pH will cause the parts of the string of amino acids that bond to some other part through these hydrogen bonds will change. And any change in the outside structure will initially decrease the effectiveness of the enzyme and then eventually make it not effective at all. So anyway, the point is, how these things fold up into some structure that is reliable and does the job is a very long-standing, very difficult problem. Like 50 years we've been aware of this problem and made not that much progress.
Yeah, figuring out the list of amino acids and the order they're in is child's play by comparison.
Right. We can get the sequence, but then the point is, okay, if I show you a sequence, what's it going to turn into, smart guy? And it's like, well, we generally don't know. Yeah. So it's the primary structure is the string, tertiary structure is the conformation, and then quaternary structure is you add multiple proteins together.
What's secondary?
I
don't remember.
Oh, it's beta sheets and...
So bigger level of folding. Secondary and tertiary are both folding.
Yeah. But anyway, there's been this long-standing contest to try to spur progress in this field, which is we give you a sequence, you tell us how it's going to fold up. And this year, huge progress was made by DeepMind, which is Google's artificial intelligence platform. And basically, the idea was that somehow DeepMind has come close to solving the protein folding problem. If the result holds up, and we don't know that it will, because frankly, it's not a published paper, so we can't really look at it. We can see, here's the sequence they were given, here's the prediction, and here's what the actual conformation of the thing looks like, but it's not like we have a full analysis to look at, but it looks incredibly promising. Now, the interesting part of it, I think it implies that the problem is simpler than we think, which it almost has to be, because for evolution to successfully navigate
That's how you evade terrifying.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of. But so if you imagine that the thing that we say in biology, which you and I have been ranting about for a long time, we say, oh, you have genes, mutations happen all the time. Most of them are bad. Some of them don't have any effect. Every so often, just by random, a gene happens to get changed in a way that increases the blah, 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 blah.
And suddenly you have ostriches.
Right.
Yes.
And the answer is actually, that's too weak a process to create these marvelous little machines What's more, these marvelous little machines, altering them slightly by this mechanism doesn't change, one kind of amphibian into another. And so there's a whole bunch of the story that doesn't quite add up and it's missing. And, I'm firmly committed to the idea that what's missing is Darwinian too. I'm not arguing that this is a challenge to Darwinism in any serious way. I think we need more and better Darwinism. But nonetheless, if it is true, so the explorer mode thing that I keep getting in trouble for, explorer mode thing suggests that selection will very quickly discover mechanisms to search design space more efficiently than it could at pure random, right? That's not a mystical claim. That's not a designer. That's selection cheats by figuring out.
Selection will have heuristics.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you're arguing.
Right. Now, the reason that comes up here is because chances are, and I don't know that we know because the way these deep learning algorithms figure out how to solve a problem doesn't necessarily tell you what they've discovered, right? What I suspect has happened is the deep learning algorithm has latched on to the product of the heuristics and started to go backwards. And so the point is, to the extent that there are patterns, there are themes in the folded up proteins that would be the result of a heuristic that searches only here and here, not all the intervening space, that DeepMind would be in a better position to spot that thing, and that ultimately it will tell us what we didn't know about the way design space is searched, right? So in some sense, I think this is potentially really interesting.
That's
and
amazing. That doesn't sound as terrifying. And it put me in mind of, this isn't, I don't think I can exactly go full circle on this, but it put me in mind of the heuristics that we are familiar with from systematics, from how it is that we infer deep history, how it is that we build evolutionary trees and deduce who's most closely related to whom. Because once you've got more than a few taxa with a few characters each, you basically can't search all of the possible tree topologies in any reasonable amount of time, even with the computing power that we have now. And so you have to, basically different software, different phylogenetic systematic software is going to be using different heuristics, and the heuristics are generally not public. And so you pick a piece of software and yes, you plug in different assumptions and hopefully as few as possible. And you end up with a set of most likely trees given your particular data set. But in that case, you don't have anything to compare it to. Like maybe you compare it over here using this data set and over here using this data set and maybe with a couple of different pieces of software. But because we don't have time travel, we can't actually go back and know for sure what the history of relationships is. Whereas with this, you actually have the empirical answer of like, what does the thing look like when it's folded? What does the protein actually look like? Let's see if DeepMind got it right. Oh, they did, and so fast.
Right.
It did. I don't know what DeepMind's pronouns are.
That's a good question.
I
wonder
think
if
it's a great
others have asked
question.
that. Yeah. I'm stopped in my tracks by that question.
Well, I was stopped my tracks by calling it a they. So
yeah. All right. Yeah. So anyway, I look, there's all sorts of reason to be terrified about the amount of power that we are gaining and the fact that we will almost certainly screw up the application of the technology that results. But from the point of view of having a total head scratcher with respect to how proteins are going to fold up versus having some window into the heuristics, I'd say this one, we should be real careful with it, but could be awesome to discover what we didn't know. And my guess is there's going to be a kind of a eureka sort of a moment in once we figure out what DeepMind did.
Okay. Well, I hope you're right. It's rare that I'm more pessimistic than you.
Yes.
But, let's hope you're right here.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I think that is it for today.
Wow.
Right?
Yep.
So consider going to store.darkhorsepodcast.org or either of our Patreons, where you will get further discount off of store stuff if you want. Bret has a conversation on his Patreon tomorrow for people at the highest patron level.
Evolutionary discussion, which I'm looking forward to. Should be great.
From 10 to noon Pacific time.
Yep.
You can access the Discord server at either of our Patreons. What else are we supposed to say?
I don't know. Maybe that's it.
Maybe try to enjoy your December. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we've got maybe maybe another hour or two before it starts raining. It will be raining until April.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
I'm going to get on my bike.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You, 2 days in a row, no, 1 day, you bike down to the river and then up to this peak, all in one ride, but half of it in the dark yesterday, right? Which is a vertical gain.
Oh, it's 1,500 foot climb. It was good.
Nice.
It was good. The weather was conducive.
Yeah, cold but clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
All right.
So do that. Go outside.
Yeah, go outside. All right. We will see you next week. Be well, everyone.